Rain hammered against the rusted metal roof as Ethan Cole stood alone in the middle of his dying repair shop, staring at the foreclosure notice nailed to the door his father had built with his own hands 40 years earlier. Oil dripped from the ceiling into a cracked bucket beside him. Half the machines no longer worked. The bank had already called 3 times that week. And outside, parked like a cruel joke in front of the muddy garage, sat a black luxury car worth more than everything Ethan owned combined. Inside that car was Victoria Hale, the most feared CEO in the state. The woman who had spent the last 5 years buying factories, crushing local businesses, and turning honest workers into unemployed statistics. She stepped out in heels that never touched dirt before that day, looked around Ethan's broken-down repair yard with disgust, and smiled coldly as if she were staring at garbage. Then she laughed. And that laugh changed everything. Before we continue, if you believe kindness matters more than money, and that second chances can change lives, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Ever Kind Stories for more emotional journeys that stay with you long after the video ends. Victoria Hale was used to power. She had built Hale Industrial into one of the largest manufacturing empires in the region before the age of 40. Newspapers called her brilliant. Investors called her unstoppable. Employees called her terrifying when she wasn't around to hear it. She wore confidence like armor and believed weakness was something people chose for themselves. So when her company's luxury vehicle broke down on a deserted highway outside the small town of Mercer Creek, she was furious. Her assistants panicked. Her security team scrambled. And the only repair shop within 30 miles belonged to Ethan Cole. Ethan was the kind of man people overlooked. His shirts were stained with grease. His boots were worn thin. His hands were rough from years of labor. But hidden beneath the exhaustion in his eyes was a quiet dignity that life had failed to destroy. He had inherited the repair shop from his father after losing both parents within 2 years. Then came medical debt from his younger sister's illness. Then the recession. Then corporate competition. Piece by piece, life stripped him down until all he had left was that tiny garage and the promise he once made to his dying father, never let the shop disappear. Victoria walked through the garage that afternoon with visible disgust. She glanced at the rusted shelves, the flickering lights, the outdated tools, and shook her head slowly. Ethan noticed her expression but said nothing. He simply examined the damaged engine carefully and began working. While he worked under the hood in silence, Victoria stood nearby speaking loudly on the phone about acquisitions and profit margins. Her expensive perfume mixed strangely with the smell of oil and smoke. Then her eyes drifted toward a stack of scrap metal beside the wall. With a smirk, she looked directly at Ethan and said the words he would never forget. She told him he should move that pile of trash somewhere else because it was ruining the view. The pile of trash she pointed at was his father's old machine parts collection. The same pieces his father spent decades preserving. The same shelf Ethan refused to sell because every broken gear carried memories of long nights spent learning beside the man who raised him. Ethan looked at her quietly for a long moment. Rain echoed outside. Somewhere in the garage, an old fan rattled weakly. Then he calmly wiped his hands on a rag and told her the trash she saw had once fed families, built homes, and kept this town alive before corporations started treating people like numbers. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to Victoria Hale without fear. And she hated it. She paid for the repair and left without another word, but before getting into the car, she looked back at the old garage and noticed something strange. Despite the broken walls, despite the poverty, despite the failing business, people kept arriving. Farmers. Truck drivers. Elderly couples. Workers. They greeted Ethan warmly. Some shook his hand. One old man brought him homemade bread because Ethan had fixed his truck for free the month before. Victoria drove away irritated by something she could not explain. That night, while sitting alone in her glass mansion overlooking the city, she found herself thinking about the repair shop again. Not because it mattered financially. It didn't. But because Ethan's words bothered her in a way no boardroom battle ever had. The next week, Hale Industrial announced the closure of Mercer Creek's largest remaining factory, an aging manufacturing plant employing nearly 400 workers. The decision was logical on paper. The factory was old. Automation elsewhere was cheaper. Investors approved immediately. But for Mercer Creek, it was a death sentence. Families panicked overnight. Grocery stores emptied. Houses went up for sale. Men who had worked there for 30 years sat silently at bars, unable to face their children. The entire town began collapsing. And in the middle of it all, Ethan watched his customers disappear one by one because nobody could afford repairs anymore. 2 months later, the bank finally arrived to seize his garage. Ethan stood in the empty shop after sunset staring at the faded photographs on the wall. One showed his father smiling beside the very first truck they repaired together. Another showed Ethan as a boy covered in grease, laughing without fear of the future. He felt like he had failed everyone. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly man named Walter Briggs walked into the shop carrying a folder filled with documents. Walter had once managed the factory before Hale Industrial bought it years earlier. He told Ethan the factory wasn't dead yet. Hale planned to sell it quietly for scrap value before demolishing it. And buried in those documents was something extraordinary, designs for a revolutionary low-cost industrial engine prototype that local workers had spent years developing before the shutdown. Hale Industrial ignored it because executives believed it wasn't profitable enough for luxury markets. But Walter believed they were wrong. The engine was efficient, affordable, and durable enough for small farms, independent trucking companies, and rural industries across the country. The problem was nobody had the money to build it. Ethan laughed bitterly at first. He couldn't even save his garage. How could he buy a factory? But Walter looked him in the eyes and told him something powerful. He said towns don't die because corporations leave. They die when ordinary people stop believing they can rebuild. That sentence lit something inside Ethan that had been buried beneath years of defeat. The next few weeks became a blur of impossible effort. Ethan sold nearly everything he owned. The townspeople organized fundraisers. Former factory workers volunteered for free. A local widow donated her savings because Ethan once repaired her late husband's tractor without charging her. People who had almost lost hope began showing up together again. Meanwhile, Victoria watched from a distance in disbelief as Mercer Creek refused to collapse the way every analyst predicted. Then came the shock that stunned the entire business world. Ethan Cole bought the abandoned factory. Not through wealth. Not through power. But through thousands of sacrifices stitched together by desperate people who believed in him. News stations mocked the story initially. Financial experts predicted bankruptcy within months. Victoria herself laughed during a televised interview when asked about Ethan's chances. She called the purchase emotional foolishness. She said small-town dreams could not survive modern markets. But deep down, something unsettled her. Because for the first time in her career, she saw people choosing loyalty over profit. The factory reopened 6 months later. The first morning workers returned, grown men cried walking through those rusted gates. Machines roared back to life. Lights turned on again across Mercer Creek. Children watched their parents smile for the first time in years. Ethan worked harder than anyone. He slept inside the factory many nights. He learned accounting after midnight, negotiated supply chains during breakfast, and repaired machines himself when workers went home. Slowly, the impossible began happening. The new engines were affordable, reliable, and built by people who genuinely cared about quality. Farmers loved them. Trucking companies switched contracts. Small businesses across neighboring states began ordering directly from Mercer Creek. Then demand exploded. Within 2 years, Ethan's factory became one of the fastest-growing independent manufacturers in the region. And the market share Hale Industrial once dominated started disappearing. Victoria became obsessed. Board meetings turned hostile. Investors demanded answers. Executives panicked as Ethan's products kept outperforming expectations. But what terrified Victoria most was not the financial losses. It was the growing realization that Ethan had built something she never could, trust. People believed in him because he never abandoned them. One winter evening, Victoria secretly drove back to Mercer Creek alone. Snow covered the streets softly. The town looked alive again. Restaurants were open. Families laughed through brightly lit windows. The old despair was gone. She parked outside Ethan's factory and watched workers leaving after their shifts. They looked exhausted but proud. Several waved at Ethan as he locked the gates personally. Victoria suddenly understood something painful. She had spent her entire life building an empire nobody loved. Money gave her power, but it never gave her belonging. For the first time in years, she felt profoundly lonely. When Ethan noticed her standing there, he walked over slowly. Older now. More tired. But stronger somehow. Victoria expected anger. Revenge. Humiliation. Instead, Ethan simply asked if she needed help with her car again. That kindness shattered her completely. Because after everything she had done, after mocking him, after destroying his town, after trying to crush his future, he still chose compassion over cruelty. Victoria broke down crying beside the same kind of luxury car she once used to look down on him. Years of buried emptiness finally surfaced all at once. She admitted she no longer recognized herself anymore. She confessed that success had turned her cold. Every victory left her feeling more alone than before. And standing there in the snow, beside the factory she once tried to erase, Victoria Hale experienced something wealth could never buy: humility. Over the following months, something extraordinary happened. Instead of fighting Ethan further, Victoria quietly began helping Mercer Creek rebuild. She funded scholarships anonymously. She reopened smaller facilities under fair labor agreements. She started listening to workers instead of silencing them. People were skeptical at first. Some never forgave her completely. But change, real change, rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives slowly through difficult choices repeated every day. And for the first time in her life, Victoria began making those choices. Years later, reporters would call Ethan Cole the man who stole an entire market from a billion-dollar corporation. But the people of Mercer Creek remembered him differently. To them, he was simply the man who refused to let hope die when everyone else gave up. And strangely enough, the person most changed by his victory was the woman who once mocked him. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. Sometimes it is building something so full of purpose, kindness, and truth that even the people who hurt you are forced to confront what they became. If this story touched your heart, don't leave quietly. Like the video, comment your thoughts below, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to Everkind Stories for more emotional stories about resilience, humanity, and the power of second chances.
If you believe in kindness, kindly please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to get all the notifications. If you like this story, so write a comment below and share with this your friends. Thank you so much for watching.